Quarter 2, Week 3. Our learning target is, I can determine if a table is proportional or non-proportional. Example 1. Here we have a table. On our table, we have the number of tickets and we have what they cost. The number of tickets will always be represented by X and the cost will always be represented by Y. When we get to our division, we always divide Y divided by X. Let's look at our steps. Step 1 says to set up the ratios. So if we look at my table, we're going to set up our ratios. Our first ratio is going to be 3/2. The 3 is considered the Y, the 2 is considered the X. That is why we put the 3 on the numerator and the 2 in the denominator. My next ratio is going to be 6/4. My next one is 9/6. My next one 12/8. And my last one 15/10. So all my ratios are set up. My second step says to divide the ratios. So we want to divide the ratios to see if we get the same unit rate. So when we divide 3 divided by 2, we get 1.5. When I divide 6 divided by 4, I get 1.5. When I divide 9 divided by 6, I get 1.5. When I divide 12 divided by 8, I get 1.5. And when I divide 15 divided by 10, I get 1.5. My step 3 says to check the unit rates. So I want to check, let me go back. I want to check all my answers. And I want to make sure that all my answers were the same. If all my answers are the same, then that's when I figure out which explanation I'm going to use. Because all my answers are the same, then that means my table is proportional. So I'm going to go with explanation number 1. The table is proportional because the ratios are equivalent. So supposed to have an S. So again, because I got all the same answer, that means I have all the same unit rate. That means my ratios are equivalent. So that means that my table is proportional because the ratios are equivalent. Let's go to another example. Here my table represents, X represents number of trees and Y represents the number of apples. So our first step is to set up the ratios. So I'm going to set them up. And remember, we set them up Y/X. So my first ratio is 26/2. My next one is 39/3. My next one is 78/6. My next one is 130/10. And my last one is 146/12. My step 2 says to divide my ratios. So I'm going to divide each one. My first one is 26 divided by 2 gives me 13. My next one is 39 divided by 3, that gives me 13. My next one is 78 divided by 6, that gives me 13. My next one is 130 divided by 10, that gives me 13. And my last one, 146 divided by 12, that gives me 12.16666, and it keeps going. So I'm just going to keep the first 2 digits, 12.6. So now I need to check the unit rates. So here are my unit rates for each of the ratios, and I want to see if they were all the same. If I look, my last one is different. So because I have one that's different, that means I'm going to go with explanation number 2. The table is not proportional because the ratios are not equivalent. So if I get one that's different, then that automatically means that the table is not proportional because the ratios are not equivalent. if I go back to the first one and they're all the same, that means that the table is proportional because the ratios are equivalent.